out of the Abyss, and now we are finally moving on into the second half of the adventure, Chapter 8, Audience in Gauntlgrym. So this is actually a very strange chapter, I would say, to start off the second half of the adventure, because it's something that the way it's written and the amount of plot potential, so to speak, is relatively left quite vague in this chapter, I believe. So I think this is one chapter where I believe it's a good place for a fresh start. But at the same time, as a DM, you probably want to prepare a little bit, get to know the chapter a bit better, and really think of the possibilities that you want to, how you would want to use it to reintroduce the PCs back into the Underdark. So we'll start off with just a summary, a breakdown of all the sections within the chapter itself that starts from page 120 to page 131 in the Out of the Abyss book. So that's actually there's actually quite a lot of pages to cover. Material that's available in the chapter, but as we go on, you see there's actually pretty light on what to do, and so so this is one chapter I feel that they actually give a lot of things for the DM to work with, and it can actually go into wildly different directions and depending on what you want to do with it. So we'll start off with the first section, summoned by Brueno. So this encounter sort of takes place 3 months after the PCs have reached the surface and escaped from the Underdark. Now, whether it has to be 3 months is entirely up to you. There is no time constraint that it has to happen within 3 months before or after that. It can be longer than that. So it's definitely a good place, like before the PCs return to the Underdark for this chapter. Some DMs will think that they want to have a change of pace on the surface. They want to run a different adventure module, or maybe a homebrew campaign, or they want to decide to end the Out of the Abyss module right here and there. Like they don't want to go, like if the players don't want to go back to the Underdark, then this is chapter 7 will have been the perfect place to end the campaign, so to speak. But if another way that you can actually do with the gap between chapter 7 and chapter 8, and do bear in mind that at least according to the book, the PCs are supposed to be able to leave the Underdark, I think at level 7, if I'm not mistaken, and they actually return back to Gauntlgrym at level 8. So there's like that one level gap where as a DM you probably find a way to figure that out. Like it could be just a milestone thing, or you could just say like, okay, they want to let them have an adventure in between, the way I went with it is that I actually decided that the 3 months was actually just downtime that the PCs had in between. Like instead of running an adventure in between, I just said that okay, you have 3 months worth of downtime, just do whatever you can do within 3 months. And there's a whole bunch of like downtime activities in the player's handbook and in the Zanata's guide. So yeah, some of my players decided to do different things, that included crafting magical items. So that's actually a relatively good break of change of pace, in the sense that now the PCs can actually get to use whatever treasures they have found within the Underdark. Now, the main point here is that the PCs are being summoned by King Brueno Battlehammer, who is the ruler of Gauntlgrym. And if you don't know who King Brueno Battlehammer is, he's actually more famous as one of the companions of the Hall from the R.A. Salvatore / Drizzt novels. But this is not the original King Brueno Battlehammer from back in the day, from the like Icewind Dale trilogy. This is supposedly the reincarnated dwarf. After Brueno died, I think in one of the novels, then he was reincarnated, I think, as a dwarf from Felbar in the Silver Marches, and then he took on the mantle as the king of Mithril Hall again, I believe, and then went on to reclaim Gauntlgrym. There's an entire whole story about that later in the book, but this is a general idea of who King Brueno is. So it's a pretty big deal NPC to be summoning the PCs to come over to Gauntlgrym. Now, besides that, one other way that you could actually, as suggested by the book, that the PCs would want to go to Gauntlgrym other than being summoned by Brueno, is if the dwarf prisoner from chapter 1, Eldef Feldrun, the female dwarf prisoner. Now, if she survives after the PCs have escaped from the Underdark, then she would definitely be telling King Bueno about the PC's exploits and her exploits of surviving the Underdark and what they saw in the Underdark, and therefore they would want to escape, and what's happening in the Underdark, which is where all the demons are appearing all about. Now that's happened. That's what happens if she's alive. If she's dead, if she dies, the PCs may be charged to bring back her warhammer and her shield to Gauntlgrym. So that may be another way you could lead the PCs into Gauntlgrym without having to receive direct summons from King Bueno. And the book just gives you some very mild suggestions about how King Bueno will actually summon the PCs. Now, then upon that, there would be the next section is the arriving at Gauntlgrym, and this is a place that the PCs can arrive from the surface. Although that's not to say that the PCs cannot arrive at Gauntlgrym from the Underdark if you choose to whatever reason not let the PCs escape from the Underdark. And according to the book here, it says that the PCs will be very warmly received, and they will be given the best hospitality that they can while they're in Gauntlgrym. Now, the next section goes on to the Gauntlgrym information or description, as you know, as the same as other settlements inside the book. And this is actually where the history of Gauntlgrym gets a little bit interesting, because it's actually quite even in just that one page where it covers the history of it. It's actually, there's a lot of things that's been happening in Gauntlgrym, how it was a very very glorious capital of one of the capitals, or it's one of the major cities of the Delzon Kingdom, and then it fell. I believe it was to orcs. Yeah, I think it fell below to orcs, and then after that, the wizards of Luskan took over from Ilask, and later on there were different residences who came and just basically took over the whole city. So you had Drow, you had Mind Flayers, you had Duergar, you even had a cult of Asmodeus at some point who actually took over the city. And then finally, only in recent times, it was reclaimed by the dwarves, led by King Bruno Battlehammer himself, and as well as together with the companions of the Hall, which, as we all know, it's a Wolfgar, Dritz, Cadibri, and I believe, and Regis. Yeah. So some of these details of the reclamation of Gauntlgrym, I believe you could find in the Dritz novel called Maestro, if I'm not mistaken. Maestro is where King Bruno is still leading the reclamation of Gauntlgrym. So you could say that Out of the Abyss sort of takes place just shortly after the reclamation has completed, and even then the reclamation is not a complete reclamation. It's only taken the throne room area, which will be discussed in the sections of the city itself. So if you really need that exact information and lore about how the city was reclaimed and what was going on during the reclamation, then that's probably the novel that you should go through. Although I believe Gauntlgrym, the city itself, was introduced into the canon lore, was made. There was a novel called Gauntlgrym. I think that takes place at least 100 years back. I think just slightly into the 4th edition period. So that's when Dritz and the companions went into Gauntlgrym, but they haven't reclaimed it yet. And in the Maestro novel, then that's when King Bruno led an actual army to actually reclaim the city. So that's that, and we'll now get on to the actual sections of the city. So in the book itself, it describes the city separated into 3 sections. There's the Vault of Kings, there's the Iron Tabernacle, and there's the Great Forge. Now, it's a very easy way to visualize it is to think of the Vault of Kings as the top level of the city, and that's basically where the PCs would be entering the city from. That's where the gate of Gauntlgrym is, and that's where they will be meeting with King Brueno, and that's where they'll be residing for a good part of the entire chapter. And at the middle section of it is the Iron Tabernacle. Now this is considered to be the religious heart of the city. That's where all the temples to all the dwarven pantheon is, and it's actually still one of the areas where the dwarves are still busy trying to reclaim and trying to rebuild. So just upon leaving the Vault of Kings, it's already going outside the boundaries of safety, and that's where all your random encounters will start happening. And then after the Iron Tabernacle, going to the last area is the Great Forge, and also the Fiery Pit. And this is actually a very significant area to the you could say economy or history of Gauntlgrym, because in the Great Forge, and inside the Great Forge, which is a fiery pit, resides an actual primordial. So this, primordials being the actual force or elemental force of nature, and there's actually a primordial there by the name of Maegra. Maegra. Yeah, Maegra, yeah, who actually sort of fuels the fires of the Great Forge, and that's actually where they actually used to create a lot of magical items, adamantium weapons, and all that sort of thing. And in the novel itself, Gauntlgrym, they actually had to like try to soothe Maegra from exploding and erupting, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was actually when Maegra was stirred. I think in the Gauntlgrym novel, it actually caused the volcanic eruptions of Mount Neverwinter, or one of the volcanoes that was near Neverwinter, and yeah, that basically destroyed part of the city during the Spell Plague era. So that's basically the three main sections. But within each section, the book does give some suggestions of what's going on at those particular areas, especially the Iron Tabernacle. They talk about rebuilding the faith. They talk about the slumber of ancients, because that's actually just beneath the Iron Tabernacle, before the Great Forge. There's a whole catacomb of crypts, and there's like ancient dwarven warriors laid to rest there, and there's ghosts. And then there's the Great Forge with the fire pit where Maegra is, and they are actually trying to the dwarves are making it a priority to try to get the forge work back on, but obviously they're not aware of how the containment situation of Maegra is. So we'll get back to all this, how these events are so helpful or significant to you as a DM trying to prepare for this chapter. But we'll just move on to the next, which is basically, I guess, what's the main plan, or what's the point of Gauntlgrym, which is the events in Gauntlgrym. So there are generally 4 events. The first one obviously is to meet with King Bruenor upon entering into Gauntlgrym. The second is to have the guest at the feast, which is a very, according to the book at least, it says it's a very free-form role-playing scene where the PCs get to interact with the guests who arrive in Gauntlgrym, they are not the only guests who are being invited. There are also members of the different factions. So they have representatives from the Harpers, the Order of the Gauntlet, the Emerald Enclave, the Lord's Alliance, and the Zhentarim. So after having meet with King Bruenor, they will have a feast, and it's really entirely up to the DM to decide how he wants to introduce the other NPCs that are also residing in Gauntlgrym, and how they interact, that sort of thing. And that may become an important part of the adventure a bit later on, which we move on to the third event, which is Bruenor's Plan, where basically Bruenor re-invites the PCs back to his throne room and to have a discussion about what he wants them to do after hearing all the stories of what's happening in Underdark and all the demon lords who are present. So according to the book, Bruenor's Plan is actually for the PCs to go and find a place called Graven Hollow, which is actually a stone giant library that is said to contain all the knowledge or all the events that has happened within the Underdark. But to be able to find Graven Hollow, they need directions from a Zhentarim contact. And the Zhentarim contact is actually residing in a secret trading outpost called Mental Derif. So Mental Derif is going to be chapter 9. That's actually going to be the place where the piece is going to head towards next. And after they've made contact with the Zhentarim agent who gives them the means to find Graven Hollow, then Graven Hollow will be chapter 10. So that's the general flow of what Bruenor's plan is, and obviously he's going to ask the PCs to, if please return back to the Underdark and find Graven Hollow, and then we can probably find a means to stop all the demon lords in the Underdark. And then the last event is the Enemies Among Us. So this one to me reads like an optional event, and this section gives a few suggestions like what can happen that can complicate the PC's stay inside Gauntlgrym. He gives you examples like there is a traitor amongst the midst, maybe among the factions. There's a succubus, maybe. Uh, maybe some of the drought pursuers from chapter 7 comes to exact revenge inside Gauntlgrym, but how do they make it inside Gauntlgrym? The premise by itself, that's really entirely up to you to figure that out. Maybe there's a dwarven assassin who is a cult member of a demon. Although Gauntlgrym is probably one of the only settlements that you would find that doesn't have any demonic influence, not directly at least, not in the way akin similar maybe to Cracklestark, in the sense that there is no actual demon lord present. But that's entirely optional in my opinion. Then another method is having a doppelganger, which is classical disguise agent, maybe one of the factions, and they're just gonna dare to try to frame PCs for murder or something like that. And the last complication is the fire elementals, which is suggested by the book. So the book is saying that because of all the demonic presence and what it's doing to the Fey race, and how their presence is warping the Underdark in itself, it might have weakened some of the constraints on Maegra. So the city is particularly under threat that Maegra may actually erupt from its slumber and in effect potentially destroying the entire city. Now the next section and after that is basically, I would find, is actually you could make this the entire point of Gauntlgrym, which is forging an alliance. So like I said, other than the PCs, there are other invited guests, which are the dignitaries from all the other factions. So when Brueno reveals his plan to the PCs that you need to find Mantle Derif and you need to find Graven Hollow, he says that obviously the first person that you need to get your contacts or have favorable ties with is a Zhentarim. So there's obviously a Zhentarim representative there, and they could probably talk to the Zhentarim agent to see how do they find their way to Mantle Derif. Now Mantle Derif is intentionally made to be a secret outpost that is not revealed on any map. So nobody knows how to get there except whoever has done business there, and in this case it will be the Zhentarim. But besides that, the PCs can also interact or meet and talk with the other factions to get their help. And this is a section of the book where it sort of reuses some similar potential as in chapter 1. As in, if you actually make friends with the factions, then each faction is going to provide you with NPCs to follow you on your journey. So each faction has a different has different stat blocks that follows the PCs, and you can find the whole list. You can find all the stat blocks of the different PCs at page 130 and 131, with all the photo stated stats over there. Yeah. And they actually vary in different numbers. If you get the help from the Harpers, he will give you a Shield Guardian. If you get help from the Order of the Gauntlet, he will provide you with Veteran of the Gauntlet. He will provide you with 5 Veteran of the Gauntlet, which I believe are just basically veterans using basically the veteran warrior stat block from the monster manual, but slightly modified to fit with the faction. If you get help from the Emerald Enclave, you'll be given 3 Emerald Enclave scouts along with enough giant riding lizards to fit the entire party, as well as the scouts. If you get help from the Lord's Alliance, they will provide you with 5 Lord Alliance guards and 3 Lord Alliance spy. If you get help from the Zhentarim, not only they will provide you with the means to find Mantle Derif, they will provide you with 8 Zhentarim thugs. So if you actually, for whatever reason, manage to actually convince all the factions to work with the PCs, then it's actually a very sizable party, and maybe even much bigger than what chapter 1 was able to provide. So this is just a caution to you. It just gives you a heads up that this is where it could potentially lead to if you follow what the book says when meeting up with the factions. And from my memory, the only faction where getting their help requires a skill check is only from the Harpers. Everyone else is just a matter of being on the same page and being able to convince them that the threat is real, or the Demon Lord is real, and I think the Lord's Alliance is actually the most skeptical of this whole Demon Lord business. But it actually makes it relatively quite easy to get help from the other factions, except for the Harper, which if you fail their skill check, I think he still gives you the Shield Guardian, but there's probably a bit more conditions to it. And then there are also other side benefits if you manage to get help from the Order of the Gauntlet. He provides you with magical items and even some treasure. And I think if you convince the Lord's Alliance, he will actually reveal to you that they have an agent disguised as a spy somewhere, which I believe you would probably meet in a few chapters in, but probably not in the place that you expect it to be. So I would say this would probably be the gist of the chapter, or what the PCs are supposed to do in Gauntlgrym. But at the same time, given what is the potential that they can get, some players may feel like they don't want to waste any time talking to these factions, and therefore they just want to move on and just want to get into the next chapter, which is Mental Derif. So this is really a chapter that it's really entirely up to the DM to decide how do they want to lead the PCs to. Do they want to keep it as short as possible so the PC can move on to the second half and get back to the Underdark to do business? Or do they want to or if they feel like the PCs are, the party is the type of that really enjoys the back and forth of role playing, then this is probably a chapter that's going to be much more extended to work with. I definitely have my own recommendations about how I ran this chapter, and it definitely deviates from what the book has provided with. I even have my own suggestions about the help that's provided by the factions, but we'll get back to that later. So after whatever it's been done, whether deciding with talking with the other factions or resolving any complications that the chapter has, then the last section is the way ahead, where King Bruno gives him the blessings and say, okay, go forth, and if we survive the coming onslaught, we'll have Yi to tank, and no Dwarf of Gauntlgrym will soon forget it. Yeah, and that sort of thing. And then they will enter into chapter 9, which is a Mental Derif. Now, for me, chapter 8, I decided to keep it relatively short, although I actually spent a lot of time prepping for it. But then I decided to scrap all my prep and try to focus it back on the PCs. Now, chapter 8, when I finished the first half of Out of the Abyss, and before I entered the second half, I was telling my players, like, okay, do you guys want something that's a bit more managerial, in a sense, like there's more resource management aspect in the adventure? And they did entertain the idea. They said that they would say it's a possibility. They would accept something more of a higher level, a higher tier of play. And I decided to base my idea around Gauntlgrym as though it was like Dragon Age Inquisition. So if you're getting the reference, then it's basically trying to turn Gauntlgrym into a base of operations, basically, and basically the PCs are the Inquisitor. They are the one who are dictating what happens around areas within the Underdark. So I sort of wanted to try turning Gauntlgrym as the base of operations, where the PCs could be able to make strategic moves while at the same time engaging into smaller, minor skirmishes or operations, which is basically finding Mental Derif and the rest of the chapters. But that's going to cost you a lot of work, because they're going to cost you a lot of reworking with the whatever the book provides to fit into a much larger scale. So that's one direction that you can go with. It has different results, I guess, for my group. But if you want to make it a little bit simpler, I would say that make Gauntlgrym the base of operations, where the PCs can always return to at any point within the later half of the adventure. Maybe there is a teleportation circle that's already been sustained for a year, so it's permanent. So as long as the PCs have any access to a teleportation circle anywhere else, they can always return back to Gauntlgrym and restock, resupply, and then re-embark from there, or whatever way. And I wanted to use Gauntlgrym. You could use Gauntlgrym as a tonal shift, in the sense that previously it was about escaping from the Underdark in the first half. Now that they have a good backing supporters, the PCs can the tonal shift is now about so-called attacking your demon lords and making the preparations, making doing the research, finding the means, gathering the men, and therefore it's going on the offensive, and the PCs maybe will not feel as afraid uh, to enter back into the Underdark, knowing that they have a place, they have a safe place to return to. In the meantime, uh, as the book suggests, you could say, like, if you're not interested in the whole interaction part of with talking with the factions and having role playing as much, and you still want to make chapter 8 a memorable chapter by itself, where there's different challenges for the PCs to go through, then that's where that's where the possibilities are really, really endless. The easiest one would be the whole Maegra plotline, where you could say, like, all right, because of the whole Maegra is showing signs that it's stirring up, and therefore the PCs will have to find a way to smooth it back down. So the book actually does, if you read the description of the fiery pit, it does mention things about something about pipes and water elementals, and maybe that's one way that the PCs will have to find their way to the fiery pit and try to either to resummon the water elementals or readjust the pipes so that they will be able to cool Maegra down. That's one basic plot line, which is nothing to do with any of the demon lords, and it's a more like a standalone plot line that happens while the PCs are in Gauntlgrym. Then obviously, if you want to introduce a demonic influence into Gauntlgrym, I would say the easiest and the safest one would probably be Orcus, because because as I said, underneath the Iron Tabernacle there's an entire grave of dwarven warriors, and so if Orcus is there, he could easily raise an army from the dead warriors, and that would in itself be a dangerous threat to the dwarves above in the Vault of Kings. And and obviously the PCs will be the right person to come down there and to stop Orcus and his whatever minions they are there. And also don't forget, not besides the dead dwarven warriors, there are a lot of dead enemies in Gauntlgrym of the dwarf, and the list comes from and I probably should mention this, despite how well detailed Gauntlgrym is in this book, there may be another book that you may want to get, which is actually from the 4th edition, I believe, and there's actually a book called Gauntlgrym, or if I'm not mistaken, it's in the 4th edition campaign guide. They have actually a very good section on Gauntlgrym, and they actually explain, and at that point in time there are Duergars, and there was a special race of, I think, vulture people who have taken over Gauntlgrym at the time, and then I think that's also where they explain the water pipes that drains down into Maegra, and therefore that particular book or section of Gauntlgrym is actually pretty useful to add on to whatever lore whatever description has been provided on top of the lore inside Out of the Abyss. So I would definitely recommend you checking out the 4th edition campaign guide, or I think the book Gauntlgrym. And also don't forget that there's the previous enemies of the dwarf who resided in Gauntlgrym, who are dead in Gauntlgrym, are the Illithids, Mind Flayers, obviously natural choices, and there's never been a proper introduction of Mind Flayers in the entire Out of the Abyss, like except for a few like roaming ones, like from the Society of Brilliance. And there are definitely a lot of people who recommend putting some Illithids inside the Asylum, but that's an optional thing. So if you need a place where it's logical for Illithids to exist, then Mind Flayers Gauntlgrym would be definitely one of that. There are the dead Duergars, and there's also a drow house who once actually turned Gauntlgrym into a minor drow city for a while, and that actually belongs to House Zolarin. So you can actually use this drow house, who has since been banished from, chased out from Gauntlgrym. You can actually use it as a foreshadowing into the Menzoberranzan chapter, which is almost the last chapter. So that's also another possible direction that you can go. And now with the release of Descent into Avernus, there is a cult of Asmodeus that once resided in Gauntlgrym, so that can be also used as a tie-in by Orcus to tie in with Descent to Avernus in whatever shape or form. And now that you think about it, it may actually be more logical or makes narrative sense for Gauntlgrym to be the one to get sink into hell because Mygra is there and that sort of thing. So, like I said, there's so many directions you can actually take Gauntlgrym to go with because there's a lack of direction relatively in the plot, in the chapter. So yeah, it's really go wherever you want. Uh, you know, I'm just throwing out ideas for you to let you go, to let you think well where you want to go with this. Uh, Another way you could actually extend the stay in Gauntlgrym is because, like I said, because the Harpers are the only one where there's actually a skill check required to get their help. You could actually just tie, different some of these quest ideas with different factions. Maybe uh, the Order or the Gauntlet requires the PCs to go banish, kill some undead, and maybe tie that with the Orcus plot. Uh, the Emerald Enclave may also require the PCs to do some exploration and maybe reclamation of some of the older temples or dwarven temple and shrines. So nature the balance is a bit restored. And also bear in mind that the Emerald Enclave agent or representative is actually a Gauntlgrym native, so she may have a bigger stake to want to rebuild Gauntlgrym, and with the PC's help, then she would be more eager to help the PCs in return. Uh, the Lord's Alliance maybe it's just a matter of convincing their representative that the threat is real, but at the same time that makes him the most susceptible target for assassination or being replaced by a doppelganger or a cult or what have you, because they are most like their help is most likely the hardest to get in terms of discussion and negotiation. So feel free to go in that direction. That the Lord's Alliance agent is actually not as helpful as it does not appear as it appears to be. Then obviously the most important one is the Zhentarim. That if the PCs don't get the Zhentarim on board, then they logically will not be able to proceed to chapter 9 and chapter 10, Mental Diary and Graven Hollow. And the Zhentarim being the Zhentarim, they always ask for something with a price. So they may be probably the only faction that is most willing to give their help, but there are probably some conditions that will tie to it, and they will probably ask for it at a later time rather than now. So yeah, so it's really a very open chapter, and it's really a very useful chapter to really set the tone for the second half of the adventure. And maybe you want to think, maybe if there were any things that you were doing in the first half that you didn't like or you didn't want to continue on doing, Gauntlgrym is actually a very good reset chapter. That's like you can actually literally just change things up and say, okay, let's not do how we were doing things in the previous half. Let's try something new. And that was actually something that I capitalized on to work with. And some other minor recommendations I would say, like when the PCs are meeting with King Brueno, let the PCs narrate how they remember the first half of the adventure, and actually take notes from their recollection and from their impression of how they remember the first half and how they theorize that the demon lords are there, because that's obviously going to be very useful for you when you're going to build up to the rest of the second half of the adventure, and also can be used to explain how the methods that can be used to banish all the demon lords, which we will get into in the later chapters, and one in particular where a solution is provided. So I think that's about it. I really don't, I mean, like I said, in terms of things to bear in mind, things to do in this chapter is not really a lot. A lot of it is really thrown back at the DM to really make do with what the book provides. And I've already given you my suggestions and ideas that what directions it can go, and how you can use it. And it's going to be quite interesting to go on from there, because I think my subsequent videos after this point may or may not be as helpful depending on what you decide to do on this chapter. But I'm going to continue on my video series with some assumption that it's by the book. It's basically going to proceed by the book, which is basically to go to Mental Derif, then go to Graven Hollow, and the PCs are going to basically have all the NPCs in the party. Although that's personally what I didn't do. I just said there were no NPCs provided by the factions. the factions are only providing you with resources, matching items, gold, equipment, maybe some good old advice, some information about the demons and demon lords they are facing with. I did also provide the PCs with the option that they could actually use the factions to help them perform downtime activities, especially those related to research and crafting. But the PCs obviously still have to come up with the funds for it, and maybe with enough wrangling they can actually make the Lords Alliance spit out the money, and then, you know, if they are good with the distribution management, and every time they come back they can say, okay, you can take this money and have this amount of downtime to perform this for me. So other than that, yeah, that's pretty much the start of the second half of Out of the Abyss. And I guess we'll be moving on to chapter 9 in my next video. So yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know any ideas that you have. Let me know any clarifications that you may need. But I don't think you don't need that much for this chapter. And I guess that's about it. So this is the Questing GM signing off for now, and I'll see you in the next prep quest video where we go on to chapter 9, Mental Derif. Bye.